Hey, it's your buddy Bob. It's another rock and roll travelogue adventure. We're seeking out the musicians, the great ones, some of the others from the 50s through the 1990s on rock and roll travelogue. You know, last time we walked around Manhattan all day. I'm in pretty good shape, but I was really tired after a long day walking and walking quickly. And then we spent the better part of another day in Greenwich Village in Lower Manhattan. But today we're going to drive to two of the other New York boroughs. We're going to start with Brooklyn. Now, our first stop on a rainy day is to Abe Lincoln High School, located at 2800 Ocean Parkway. Neil Sedaka graduated from here in 1956, and his longtime writing partner, Howie Greenfield, also graduated from this school. Neil Sedaka's biggest hits were Breaking Up Is Hard to Do, Calendar Girl, and Oh Carol. That song was about his high school girlfriend, the future megastar, Carole King. Neil Sedaka was one of the songwriters at the Brill Building that we visited last time in Manhattan. And that, of course, produced all kinds of, dozens, even hundreds of hit records over the years. Neil Sedaka's biggest song written at the Brill Building was a song for Connie Francis called Stupid Cupid. These were all hits for her in the late 50s and Neil in the 1960s. And here he's pictured with your bearded host in 1975 in downtown Cleveland. And that was a huge year for Neil Sedaka. He made a big comeback with a song called Laughter in the Rain that he recorded. And later in the year, he had a number one song called Bad Blood. And also, he wrote the number one song for the entire year of 1975 called Love Will Keep Us Together by the Captain and Tennille. And here's your host with Daryl Dragon and Tony Tennille and another person I cannot remember. I'm very sorry. But that picture was taken in 1975 as well. Well, back to Abe Lincoln High School in Brooklyn. Also graduating from Abe Lincoln was Neil Diamond. Neil Diamond's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and also the Songwriters Hall of Fame. In addition to his own songs, his most famous song written, by the way, written at the Brill Building, famous song written for others was the Monkees' number one hit, I'm a Believer. And that was covered in the 1990s, you'll remember, by Smash Mouth. Neil's Sweet Caroline, sung at sporting events over much of the world to this day. His number one songs were Cracklin' Rosie, Song Sung Blue, and You Don't Bring Me Flowers. That was a duet with Barbra Streisand, who incidentally was a classmate of his at Erasmus High School in Brooklyn before he moved over to Abe Lincoln, where he graduated. Well, here is Erasmus High School at 911 Flatbush in Brooklyn. Neil Diamond said he and Streisand were not friends, although they knew each other at this high school. Neil Diamond spent a good part of his boyhood in this area at Church Avenue and Coney Island in Brooklyn. And now his fellow New Yorker, Paul Simon, once referred to him as, quote, the Jewish Elvis, end quote. You know, I couldn't leave Brooklyn without visiting the site of the old Ebbets Field at 55 Sullivan Place. This was the home of the Brooklyn Dodgers before they broke Brooklynites' hearts in 1957 and moved west to Los Angeles. Apartment buildings stand on this old site in a rundown neighborhood today. Well, next we're on the move to 160 Hall Street in Brooklyn to see an early apartment of Patti Smith. And by the way, Patti Smith is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Patti lived here in the Red Place at 160 Hall Street with her mate, the famous and rather controversial artist Robert Mapplethorpe. The apartment and the neighborhood have been gentrified and renovated since. Patti was a punk rocker and a poet, and she had her most well-known song in 1978 called Because the Night. And by the way, that was co-written by Bruce Springsteen. Well, let's go. I've got more high schools to visit in Brooklyn and more artists to talk about. So James Madison High School at 3787 Bedford in Brooklyn, pictured here, is where Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Carol Klein, who later became Carole King, graduated in 1958. She and her husband, Jerry Goffin, whom she met here at Queens College, went on to write dozens of songs, again out of, you guessed it, the Brill Building in New York City. Songs like Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow and The Locomotion, which was first by Little Eva. By the way, she was their maid. That was in the 60s, and about 10 years later, Grand Funk Railroad had a hit on Locomotion as well. The two songs that I referenced were #1 songs for King and Goffin. Carole King became one of the biggest solo acts of the 1970s. Her debut album, Tapestry, and the big song off that album was It's Too Late. Other notable grads from James Madison, by the way, are Senators Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer. Oh, and we can't forget Judge Judy, graduated from James Madison High School in Brooklyn. Well, now we're into Queens. The second of two boroughs today. We're on to Forest Hills High School in Flushing, Queens, at 6701 110th Street. Here's the high school. The most famous grads from here are boyhood pals Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, who became Simon and Garfunkel, and they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Other famous grads are the superb songwriter Burt Bacharach, and also Leslie West of the band Mountain. Mississippi Queen was their biggest hit in 1970. Bacharach wrote hit songs from the 60s well into the 21st century, had 8 #1 songs in all, including Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head and Arthur's Theme. Well, the handsome pianist Bacharach was once married to movie star Angie Dickinson and later to singer Carol Bayer Sager, with whom he collaborated on lots of songwriting. We'll talk more about this epic songwriter when we cover future artists on Rock and Roll Travelogue. In the back of the school at Forest Hills is the baseball field. It's called Jackie Robinson Field, in honor of the first Major League Baseball player who broke the color line in Major League Baseball. He was the first black player in 1946. And he played at the old Ebbets Field that we visited a couple of moments ago because he was a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Well, Paul Stanley was a co-founder of the heavy metal band Kiss in 1973. He grew up in a section of Queens known as Kew Gardens. His home was about 2.5 miles from Forest Hills High School. His co-founder of Kiss was Gene Simmons, born in Israel. Simmons and his mother moved to Queens, where he grew up. You remember Kiss had Rock and Roll All Night and Party All of the Day. That was in 1975. And The Softer Beth a year later. Their albums continued to chart throughout the rest of the 80s and 90s, the period that Rock and Roll Travelogue covers. They charted beyond that as well. In the late 70s, you might remember Gene Simmons had well-publicized romances with superstars Cher and Diana Ross. And Kiss, by the way, is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Well, let's look now at some childhood homes in Queens. Paul Simon's boyhood home on 70th Street in Flushing, Queens. And a few moments around the corner is the home of his pal Art Garfunkel on 72nd Avenue. Now, speaking of Art Garfunkel, the two of them, of course, were together, but they split up in the early 70s, and Garfunkel had a solo hit called Second Avenue. And as I was walking around Manhattan the day before this, I just had to take a picture of Second Avenue, which memorialized the song in 1974. Beautiful song by Arthur Garfunkel. Well, in the 70s, as Simon and Garfunkel were by now huge stars, a new TV show came out that was set in Queens. The show would become one of the biggest hits of the 1970s, called All in the Family, featuring the character Archie Bunker, played by Carol O'Connor. Well, let's head out further in Queens to Ozone Park. We're going to go to the childhood home on 104th Street of Cyndi Lauper. Girls just want to have fun, you know. And here's her childhood home. I must say, right around the corner was a wonderful pizza shop that I stopped for lunch, and they talked me into the upside-down Sicilian. Loved it. Highly recommend it. Well, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. That song and many more led to Cyndi Lauper being inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2025. Ozone Park is the home to Aqueduct Racetrack, and it's also where the Gambino crime family and John Gotti operated for many, many years. Well, let's recap today's visits and the members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that we've talked about. Neil Diamond, Carole King, Patti Smith, Paul Simon and Arthur Garfunkel, and Cyndi Lauper. Well, that's enough for this episode of Rock and Roll Travelogue. Next time, we're going to drive up to another borough of New York, the Bronx, and then over to Long Island. So until then, this is Buddy Bob saying good heart and stout luck.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.